Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and also our partners, sister partners over at 92.1, and that's WFOV. And we are very glad to be here again at the studios. And you will pick this program up that goes live from 2 to 3 on Mondays, but we are re-airing the program on WFOV on Saturdays at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. The program being preceded by the great program, Whose Opinion Is It Anyway? And we always give a shout out to the visionary over there, and that's none other, and I think you all know him by now. We've been mentioning his name on a couple of our programs here, Mr. Paul Herring, who is a visionary, and this man is really something. I have a lot of respect for Paul. I have a lot of respect also here at our studio, and that's John Wilson, who does the sound for us, and then the light technicians who are here, and they don't get a lot of acknowledgement. I think you sometimes will get the impression the way we do our business here that we are here doing all of the things by ourselves. It's a much larger production than what you can see on the camera. We just got here before the camera and on the network, radio network, and we take all the bows, but behind the scenes, a lot of people are doing a lot of things here. And I want to show some appreciation for the role they play, because if they don't do what they're doing, I can guarantee you 1,000% that if they don't do what they're doing, then we can't do what we do. And that's all the ones, I'm speaking here on behalf of all the ones that come before the camera and do the programs that you see here on allpointstv.com. A lot of things go on before we even get to the camera. We were talking last week about our government, supposedly government of the people, by the people, for the people. And are you kidding? The theory is we have government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's the way it works in the United States, different than the way it works anywhere else in the world. And we have the greatest government leaders, the politicians, greater here than they are anywhere else, and they are beyond corruptibility. John, this is the myth. They're beyond corruptibility, and they are in Washington right now doing the bidding of the people. And I want to come here to do the follow-up of our program last week, where we were talking about this notion of government being of the people, by the people, for the people, and the myth of Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves. You know, once I had uncovered this myth through my own reading, I had to then answer the question of what is this myth really designed to do? What is the purpose of the myth? I mean, I know when I finished doing some research outside of the books that you're given in your training, and that's what it is, training, from grade 1 to grade 12 in the public school, and then you get 4 more years of indoctrination in the BS degree. And beyond that, you can go and get the master's degree, and then the degree that is the piled high and deep degree, the PhD.
I always wondered. My grandmother always made sport of that, the BS degree, then the M degree, the master's degree, then the PhD. She always said, more stuff piled higher and deeper.
Piled high and deep.
It's like, you know, and because she was very cynical about, you know, she was very cynical about education.
About it too. Now that I've been through it.
You know, just sometimes it's just, you ever think about all the degrees? And you and I both study different areas. You know, you got a degree in economics. I have a background in social sciences and all that, and then it's enough to know that I'm saying, like, I'm still like, why did I even bother? I mean, this stuff seems like it's totally just built up on it's a house of cards. I mean, it's a house, it's built up on sand. It's like, it's so shaky. I mean, all this stuff, I mean, there's very little concrete, little, very stable platform you're dealing with. It's like, it's all very easily be blown apart, you know.
John, I'm finding out how this whole scheme is put together, and I have to say this, it's not a disrespect for the American people, but everybody in America, to some extent, is brainwashed. And really, if you are inside of an organized society where you have government, and therefore from government you have an organization in place that governs the people, through which there has to be certain shared assumptions in order for them to maintain stability, then I can tell you right now, there's no society on the planet that's not brainwashed. And the ones who are the beneficiaries of it more than anyone else are the politicians. And that's everywhere I've been. I've been in many countries, and I have not seen the association any different in terms of the people's relationship to their government. And it's the same here as it is elsewhere that I've been. Government of the people, by the people, for the people is a mirage. It's a total myth. But that's the shared assumption that you have. And I have to ask the question of why are these assumptions that we have, Lincoln being the great emancipator, for example, or government of the people, by the people, for the people, what are these assumptions designed to do? And the answer is that it is designed to maintain a certain amount of social order. And in looking at it in terms of how the Lincoln myth is in fact used, what that brings us to is the benevolence of government leaders, and that Lincoln would be the head of that in terms of being the greatest president. And what he did was, in fact, put the nation on the line to fight for the independence of the slaves. And this was unconscionable in his mind, that we'd have slavery in a country that's founded upon the principles of we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And so it's unconscionable the way they have taught Abraham Lincoln for this man to be living in a country that has pledged itself to those particular ideals, and we have slavery within the population of the country, and he fought a war to end slavery in the United States. Now, when I found out by doing the extracurricular activities in terms of going beyond the college professors, the high school classrooms that you had, where you were taught all these myths, when I found out that this was nothing other than a mirage of propaganda that was in fact taught in these indoctrination centers, I then had to go to the question, try to answer the question, what are these myths intended, what are they designed to do? And what these myths are designed to do, first and foremost, is to maintain social control and a belief in the order in which has been established and set up on behalf and in the name of the beneficiaries, who ultimately are the political class members in the society and in every society. This is a cesspool that we're in. And now that we're mentioning it, we need to understand what we're talking about when they say that we're going to drain the swamp. I mean, was this swamp a swamp just created, you think, in the last election? Everything was going hunky-dory and everything was wonderful. Everything was great until we had the last election in 2016. Okay, fine. Okay, if you think that this swamp was just created in the last election, 2016 to the present time, I want to take you back to the beginning of what we created here, because we have the greatest of the foundational documents. But then when you begin to apply this, the theoreticals into a practical application of what you had written in theory, because the theories we have written in our documents, in the course of human events and so on, the Declaration of Independence. I don't think anybody's written anything any better as a treatise of government, as a foundational point of government, than what was written by the great Thomas Jefferson, who was a great theoretician. I didn't say a great president. And I am still contending here that we've only had one great president, and it wasn't because of anything that he did in power. It's what he didn't do with power, and that was he disavowed his interest in the pursuit of power, and after 2 terms had done what he needed to do, which was to be the one to stabilize the setting up of the government. And after those 2 terms are over, I give him a lot of, George Washington, who I'm talking about, and I give him a lot of credit, because after 2 terms, not being in the pursuit of power and not accepting the mantle that had been handed to him practically by those that wish him to be a replica of what they fought against, which King George III, and what George Washington did, to his great credit, which makes him a great president, is that he disavowed the the intentionalities of those that wanted to put him into power and maintain him in a lifetime, and he rejected that.
But I got a point here too, like the word "great." I just had a conversation with somebody the other day, and they're saying, "Well, was America ever great?" And I said, "Well, it came to me. It's like I think there's a greatness to good things about the United States, which makes it great. But if you actually look at the term "great," Alexander the Great was considered a great person because he conquered the world. If you're one of those countries where she conquered, you wouldn't really like the guy. So I mean, so great is a relative term, but I mean, it's like a term in perspective, you know. But I just thought that make that point because it was like because it would make America great again. Some people say that's racist connotation.
It's not racist. You know, America was on its ascendancy in the early times of the country, and it was great. You know, Donald Trump is saying right now that when he runs in 2020, he's going to be running on the campaign of Keep America Great. And what he's getting at is the same thing, John, that you're talking about, is that this country was great. But what made it great was the fact that it had an absence of the intrusion of these politicians in the political order of the country. It was a limited government. And because of that, because liberty was larger than the government intrusion, this country was great because it was the liberty center. And because of that, we sprung from that base all the things you saw going on in the 19th century.
If you look at just the rapidity of the rapidness of what we became from a country that was largely forests and deserts and untamed territory, or territory that wasn't built up. From bam, we were overnight. We're to become a world power. I mean, in the perspective, England took how many millennia? Because it had been a vassal state of Rome at one time. It was conquered by the Romans. And then the Roman Empire fell, and they had to deal with that collapse. And the aftermath of that developed their own forms of government. And it was a lot of trial and error. Mm-hmm. A lot of horrific things were done because of assumptions of power and because of desire for power. But we avoided a lot of that because we saw the catastrophes that happened after that.
Yeah, it was great, John. Anyone that says that America was not great has not understood what made this nation stand out from the community of nations throughout history. We were the first nation founded upon the principles of liberty. You can't find another nation, no matter how far you go back, that was founded upon the principles of limited government and a free people. Try to find that anywhere.
A lot of people who try to discredit the United States because you took the land from the population, the native population. Again, and then the same people say, but in Europe they do this, in Europe they do that. They're ignoring that Europe, no matter where you walk, where you stand, where you walk up on, is a massive graveyard, okay? The bones are lying, and blood is up in that soil from people's blood was shed for any various regions you can imagine. So, I mean, this arrogance that, I remember Europeans telling me about Americans being so violent because we had gun violence. And I'm thinking, it was 1940s, I grew up in the 1960s, I knew a lot of World War II veterans who went the European theater to push back the tyranny of Nazism and stuff like that, and yet then they're acting like they're so disconnected from this violence that just happened, and I know we were drawn into it. I just think it's sheer arrogance for them to say, "Oh, you're so violent." Duh. For one thing, we stemmed from you people in the first place. Mm-hmm. Second time, we actually came out 2 times to make sure that wasn't somebody would emerge victorious, so you could have relatively free societies. So your arrogance about us being violent is just so misplaced. It's so mockable.
You can't find another nation that was born out of the doctrines that were set up at the very beginning of the nation's founding, that was founded upon the principles of liberty. The people, all men created equal. That's not found in the founding documents of any other nation.
Other nations didn't have founding documents. They didn't have our overarching game plan in mind. Ayn Rand brought that to our attention.
Ayn Rand brought that to our attention. And every nation that has that now would have been doing the copying of what was in fact conjured up by the colonists in this country after they had done some experiment with other types of government. When they came here, first of all, they came here in order to get away from taxation. Now, they're not going to ever say that. Because if they say that they came here to get away from taxation, then this idea of taxation without representation being the issue falls apart. They came here to get away from taxes altogether. And of course, when government follows them over here, then of course the taxes follow them over here as well. But if you go back and look at the founding principles of the nation, you find that in the writing of Thomas Jefferson, where they were declaring the independence of England, they were saying that all men are created equal and that they have certain unalienable rights, and that unalienable right would be the right to own your own personhood and to own your own labor. And that's why when they would then take the document of their freedom, spell out in the Declaration of Independence, and then they began to create a constitution around those ideals, they would have the taxing power of the federal government restricted. They could not put a tax upon your earnings because that was the taking away of some of your liberty and some of your sovereignty. So therefore it was disallowed in the Constitution, and it took an amendment much later after we gotten away from remembering what these ideals were. After we got away from that, back in 1913, they then placed in there a taxing power of the federal government to tax income in this country. That was not allowed by the framers. And they would be abhorrent to come back and see what was put in place almost 200 years after they had set up this government and transformed it into what it is now from what it was at the very beginning. But America was great as long as it found the foundational principles of the country. It got away from that because what government does, and has done it all over the world, has done it throughout history, is that governments have always tried to slide away from any accountability and any restraints upon its power. And it's done it here. Under all the things we put in place to restrict government and restrain it from going out of control, checks and balances, separation of powers, the dispersal of powers on the federal level, where you have some powers on the federal level and some among the states, the restraints upon government in the 10th Amendment, where you say that all the powers not delegated specifically to the federal government are therefore submitted and reclaimed and maintained by the states. So anything not delegated to the federal government expressly in the Constitution, which has express powers, mean they are delegated and limited. Then the powers that are not limited, then those are the powers retained by the people and by the states they're in, that's delegating the powers to the federal government. That was the intention of the framers, because they saw what had happened in history, where governments have a tendency to go out of control, and this government's out of control here. Let me read something to you that along this line. There was an article last week in the Washington Times, and this article indicates what we're looking at right now. Might be too blinded by government's nonsense to see it, but this article shows you exactly what's taking place right now with President Donald Trump. The article is titled, in the Washington Times, is titled, "This Trap Was Set Well Before Trump Won." This article is talking about the trap that was set, where you saw it in terms of what's been put out now. What we now know was some of the dialogue going on behind the scenes between those that were highly placed in the FBI, Peter Strzok and his girlfriend, and Strzok was married, and so was his girlfriend. They have an illicit arrangement. They have an affair going on inside the FBI. And we're supposed to believe that to call these persons on the carpet for what they did as heads of the FBI is to target the entire agency. We're not talking, nobody's targeting in the entire agency. What's being targeted here are those guys on the 7th floor of the FBI who are corrupt.
Again, I'll play the devil's advocate here. I think that's like a fish; it rots from the head first.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that they're just giving the underlings are just giving orders. So if they're giving the orders to just harass or survey or surveil this one group, then guess what? They're part, and they're so willing to. They have to. That's a chain of command or something. But to me, it does draw into question the entire agency. It does. I mean, because their willingness to do this.
The ones underneath these leaders, Those are the ones that was down there last week that did the investigation of this bomber that was in Austin that was sending these bombs out. Okay, that's the agency that's out there in the field. They're not policymakers. John, they were the ones that were sent out there to do the legwork. Right?
And I got to say that I'm glad, hopefully this is the only bomber, and that he doesn't have a copycat or a associate or a cohort or anything, because this is insanity. This happened in the 60s and 70s, though. I mean, like you had Kaczynski, Ted Kaczynski doing this stuff. I think that was through the 70s or 80s or not even the 90s. So this stuff, this is deplorable. Any of this, I mean, the randomness of this type of potential violence is just disgusting, It's just disgusting evil.
Yeah, I give the FBI foot soldiers, those out in the field, I give them a lot of credit for their investigative work. They put 500 persons down in Austin because they had to stop this guy sending these bombs out, of course, and they had to stop it. That's what the agencies are designed to do. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about James Comey, who is corrupt. And we're talking about Clapper in the CIA. We're talking about the DIA, the Department of Intelligence Agency. That's a corrupt agency at the top. We're talking about Mueller. Mueller was FBI director. Now he's investigating Trump.
All these people have long ties. They have been established as part of that deep state we're talking about. All these people.
They are deep state, and the deep state, John, as we're now finding out, the deep state is really the government itself. These persons are masked. And this article, this trap was set well before Trump won. You heard him talking about that in the FBI, because on those tapes and in those emails, you had Peter Strzok and his girlfriend inside the FBI saying that they had to have a backup plan. They didn't think Donald Trump was going to win, but in the event that they weren't able to stop him by dirtying up his name through the use of the so-called free press, and we don't have a free press. The press in this country has been captured by the politicians. They're in bed with each other. That's why that's why many persons are now saying that the media, and I'm talking about the leaders there, the New York Times, the Washington Post, these persons are nothing other than an extension of the Democratic Party.
Well, I'm at here at the studio. We've had inside information about major stories about politicians that we didn't pursue because, let's face it, we do our studio. We have a very modest studio. Some people say rink-a-dink one. And we knew that the power, as soon as all they could do is they could do anything they wanted to us, the politicians, locally, if we wanted. So let's face it, the pressure is there. I mean, and I admit it, because basically, I just don't want to do that much of intensive reporting, because I want to give people an avenue to air opinions and stuff. But they shut us down would be, let's face it, they have that power. And it's too much power to do that.
Along that line, I'll just sidetrack that point just for a minute before I get back to my topic. I'm glad to see they're bringing Zuckerberg. Before, I hope they will call him in. There's some discussion now of calling Zuckerberg in because of the way that he's handling this very powerful engine. Is one of the most powerful men in the world, Facebook. This man, this guy is really something. His network is really something. They are censoring speech that they disagree with and shutting it down. So they're getting ready to bring him in to ask him some questions about how he's handling the Facebook. He's got too much power to be censoring what people can say and what they can know through a network that he controls as a powerful international engine.
Well, see, another thing is, though, but I think is I can understand. I don't like what he does. I'm not saying that, but I already alluded to that. I didn't cover stories, or we didn't cover stories here that we found almost like cringeworthy or possibly really damaging to our major idea, which is basically giving a vehicle for people to give opinions. And I can understand it. If there's some things he doesn't like, he finds displeasing or disagreeable. He should have weighed that in before he started opened it up to everybody. Maybe he should have had some criteria so people could have. It's kind of balancing it with the act of. He's not the individual, and it is a public traded company. So once he opened that up, he has to understand it's out of his hands now. But let's face it, he could cry all the way to the bank, and that's what he's been. Let's face it, he's opened it up, but he can't really cry foul when people are questioning his reluctance to allow people to air their opinions. I think that's disgusting on his behalf.
There's something to be said about that, and I hope they will carry it through. Right now it's at the discussion point, but I hope they will carry it through in terms of getting some understanding of how he is running this because they are FCC based also, and when you have the FCC, the government get involved in it, then the engines are under the idea of serving the public interest, and you have the censorship going on here, and that could create a problem. I do know that he is shutting down conservative speech.
Facebook slid 7% yesterday in the stock. Yesterday or last week. Last week. So that's pretty telling right there. It's like, and they're thinking that this and I think it largely is because this opposition to the scrutinization process he's putting through, the conservative thought on, and removing it. I mean that it's reflecting that. There is an outcry and a reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. Let me get back to this article, because I want to make sure I cover much of what's in this article because of the tremendous work that was done here, the editorial that appeared in the Washington Times. The Washington Times is a conservative newspaper, and unlike the Washington Post, you can actually look at his editorial page and see that it has a more balanced way of looking at what really the press should be doing, which is holding government accountable. The reason they put Article 1 in the Constitution, among other reasons, was to maintain a free press. Excuse me, because the press is supposed to keep the government held to account by reporting out to the American people what the government is doing. In other words, we can't really hold the government to account unless we have some way of knowing what government is in fact doing, because government likes to operate behind closed doors and in the darkness so they can keep the public from holding them accountable. Power does not want to be held to account. And so the framers wanted to have the press, the free press, the press to be free, so that it would have the prerogatives of going into its investigative mode and reporting out what is government doing behind the people's back, where it is not being restrained because the people don't know when government is really going beyond the parameters of its control based upon the constitutional mandates. Well, anyway, you can see what the framers had in mind. They didn't have in mind having what we have today, which is the government marrying the press, and the press being an arm of one of both of the political parties. I mean, who can trust anything that the press is saying? But the Washington Times does a very good job most of the times with what it's doing. And one of his editorials, "This trap was set well before Trump won," shows what we now know through some of the documents that have come forward and now have been made public about how they were discussing behind closed doors. The FBI had memos, the people at the top had memos going back and forth where they were saying that, what if we can't stop Donald Trump? What if this noise being put out here about how dangerous he would be, and of course he would be dangerous to them because he's not one of those persons inside of the elite running as an outsider and running as a populist candidate. He was running outside of the main order. So they were saying the what ifs. If he gets in, what if he was not stopped at the point of the electoral process? What would they do then? And they were saying that if, in case he got in, then they had a backup plan. And they're discussing this. What do you do if he, in fact, gets into the presidential office? What would they do at that point? Okay, we're going to stop right now and allow our sister network to take its break.
No, we're coming back from break. Yeah, we didn't. We
coming back from break.
Yeah, because
we didn't have the break.
Well, you're making a point. I didn't want to break. I didn't want to break into that point.
So we're coming back from break.
They can always listen to All Points TV to see what you said in the absence.
Okay.
But yeah, you're making a point. I didn't want to stop you.
Okay, I will stop it, John.
Yeah, okay, but I do apologize for that, people. But yeah, and also you can always catch the full shows on All Points TV on YouTube. So subscribe to that. But yeah, I apologize, but you're making too valid a point. I didn't want you to interrupt you. So
yeah.
Anyway, so
Okay, well, John will always let me know most of the time. 99% of the time, I'll get the signals to cut to 92.1's break.
You're right there, and I can't break this because it was too good of a point.
Yeah, I do want to again thank 92.1 because we're honored really to be a partner with such an outstanding station. I can tell you right now, if you're not listening to 92.1 and their programs and what they're doing over there, you're missing something really great in the city of Flint. And as I say this over and over again, I wish they had more voltage because what they're doing, quite frankly, does not get out to as vast of an audience as they deserve because their voltage is not as large as it should be. And hopefully that's something we'll work on as we go toward our greater destiny. But they don't have the voltage that I would like to see them have where they get out to a much wider audience.
But one good thing about it,
that's probably in the making, though.
But they are also they do live streaming from several of their shows. They do live streaming on the internet, too, for a few of them like that. And whose opinion is it anyway? I mean, that's live streamed as well on they can see it through Facebook anyway. Yeah. So subscribe to WFOV on Facebook as well.
Yes, I saw that when I was in the studio last week. Well, anyway, that's we want to thank them for being a partner here at allpointstv.com. This article that I'm referring to, this trap was set well before Trump won. If you get a chance to read the whole article, it came out last week. This article came out on, on Wednesday of last week, and is in the Washington Times, called "This Trap Was Set Well Before Trump Won." They had a backup plan that if Trump got through, what they really are talking about is that if he was able to get through all the anti-Trump articles and the people were able to fight through the maze to understand the propaganda and get past it and then vote for him anyway, then they had a backup plan, and that backup plan is what you see being carried out now by the very corrupt Robert Mueller. He was formerly a head of the FBI. These people had a backup plan, and the backup plan was to frame Donald Trump. And now that they have been investigating this thing Mueller's been investigating it for 10 months. And the issue has been investigated for 14 months. And the House could no longer hide behind the facade that they are investigating collusion when there was no collusion. And that was well known before they did the investigation. But they couldn't continue the charade forever because it would come back to hunt them. We're getting ready for the midterm elections this year. So now the House, which is made up of a majority of Republicans, they caved. That's what this amounts to. They caved and came out and said, as if they didn't know ahead of time, there was no collusion, and they weren't able to find any collusion. In terms of Mueller's case, look at what they did here. On the one hand, the House, and don't forget the purse strings are controlled by the House. Mueller couldn't operate unless he was getting the funding for his investigation from the House. So they closed down their investigation, but guess what else they did? They allowed the investigation to go forward under Mueller. They shut theirs down now because there was no collusion. That's their finding. And there's Mueller over here operating as if he's a renegade, and he's still investigating collusion. Why is that? I'll tell you why it is. Because they are subjected to the voting process in 2018, and they will in fact continue to irk Donald Trump supporters, so they can't be out there like that. So they shut theirs down because they're going to be for the voters pretty soon. But they allow Mueller to go forward. And there's so many people been exposed over there with this nonsense. That's also people I used to have a lot of respect for, because I thought they were talking doing their due diligence and was really representative of the voice of the American people. People like Trey Gowdy from South Carolina. I thought this guy was an honest broker until I began to listen very carefully to what he's talking about. And he was on TV. He was on one of the programs Sunday before last, and he was up there talking about we ought to continue this bogus. He didn't say bogus. I'm saying bogus. we should continue this investigation, and Mueller should not be shut down. Well, if you shut down your investigation and did not shut down Mueller's investigation, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth.
I know a person who used to work for the FBI, and she and I don't agree on politics. And this was like they're talking about Trump and the skeletons in every candidate's closet. And I don't like intrusiveness. I don't like people spying on each other. I don't like that. But once a person declares himself as an officer, such a high candidacy, and all that, I think that should be just the norm. That the FBI should be unleashed on them to sniff out anything and ferret anything out. Because it would be better to know before they actually run and get elected all their stuff that we might find of issue with. That's what I think they should be doing. They should be, but they're not going to do that because in the case that person gets to power, then their funding's like in perilous shape, or on the chopping block. So they're always concerned about, and that's the problem with the FBI. Any investigative organization that might have to investigate the very criminals, or politicians rather, interchangeable. Their funding should be separate, so they can do those type of things. They can actually investigate these people before they run for office.
Yes.
I like Trump, but let's face it, if he had something to do with some backdoor deal with the Russians, which I find highly unlikely, but if he did, I want it brought out. I want it to be brought out before he ran. Why couldn't they done that then? That's what I like to know.
Yes, I like Trump as an outsider. I don't like any politician that is on the inside, because the inside is where the corruption is, and one spoiled apple spoils the whole barrel. That's
the reason why I have less likely a belief that he probably didn't have anything to do with it, but it's possible, because let's face it, he's really, really, really rich. They might have approached him, and said they could have. That's a possibility. I can't rule that out. As much as I like some things that Trump said and did, other things, he's still an unknown to me in his personal dealings. Man, really.
One thing that we've never seen before, and that I've been watching, is that we have never seen an investigation going forward where they are looking for the crime that they are investigating. They're claiming there's a crime that was committed, and yet they're in search of the crime. And now that they have been doing this for 10 months, and we're asking the question, where is the crime? They're now trying to move away from this idea of collusion into obstruction of justice. And that's where the problem is going to be. Not that there's an obstruction of justice, because there's no justice to obstruct.
Well, typically there's
no justice to obstruct here, because there's no collusion.
If you believe the CSI shows on TV, they're supposed to follow the evidence. Well, then now it seems like we got a crime. Now let's see if we can get evidence. Even though they don't know what the crime is, we're gonna go sniff around and see if we can put this together and create a crime out of it. So.
Yes, I see them trying to validate the authenticity of the investigation by Mueller, after saying that their investigation was shut down because there's nothing authentic about it, and to shut it down, isn't it something they was out the other side of their mouth? They would claim then that Mueller's investigation go forward. Why would they do that? Because Mueller is insulated by the deep state. The deep state again is made up of these politicians who are right there out in the open, but they're masked in terms of what they represent. Let me get to this article. If I don't get this article, I'm going to run out of time here. This trap was set well before Trump won. It says, so this is the new standard for electing president here in America. The greatest living experiment I don't have my glasses here, in self-governance. A man can run the gauntlet against more than 20 professional politicians and come out victorious. He can win more than 40 Republican primary contests and beat every professional political campaign out there, earning the votes of more than 14 million Republicans. He can then turn his attention to beating the most powerful entrenched political machine America has seen in nearly half a century. That corrupt machine had just pulled off his most devious and dishonest scam ever, rigging a presidential primary to snatch the party's preferred socialist candidate away from Democratic voters. In other words, Hillary Clinton having the underhandedness and the support of the Democratic Party to rig the election against Bernie Sanders and snatch the nomination in the Democratic Party away from this candidate. These are the long agreed upon standards for winning the White House. This is how self-governance, quote unquote, works today. Through a combination of representative democracy and a balance of state power against federal power, we the people pick our presidents according to the norms set up by the framers. Unless, of course, the president we the people pick turns out to be a grave and odious threat to the powerful established bureaucracy in Washington that, like cancer itself, is entirely dedicated to its own preservation and its spread. In other words, the people will decide unless they decide in a way in which the rulers disagree. And damn the innocent hosts. The more devastating the cancer is to the very body politic that gives it life, the better. It is the truest form of injustice, singular evil, blind hatred. So they changed the rules. We can pick our president, but then the powerful established bureaucracy must conduct a massive, sprawling, limitless investigation into any and all aspects of the president we pick. The basis of this, quote, investigation is an increasingly debunked frame-up designed and drafted by the Kremlin, quote unquote, and paid for by President Trump's political opponent in the presidential election, and then spread to all four corners of the globe by the oldest creatures of the powerful establishment in Washington. At the height of the presidential election, the administration of the outgoing president of the United States, Mr. Trump's most powerful political enemy, handed over the controls of America's spy apparatus to begin moving against Mr. Trump in his campaign. They exposed people, spied on people, and began setting the trap just in case the stupid people, meaning us, of America picked Mr. Trump to be the president. In other words, we are stupid if we don't do the bidding of the rulers. They lied, conspired, and held secret meetings. So Special Counsel Robert Mueller's endless investigation in search of a crime should have been no surprise. It was cooked up long before Mr. Trump even won the election. Of course, these people were going to do this. It is this new standard for self-governance in America. The people can elect any president they want, but then these people will do everything, including assassinate their character, to hound them out of office. Truly, these people, listen to this part here, this last line in this article. Truly, these people, these persons that make up the political elite in this country, truly, these people cannot fathom how much innocent taxpayers despise them. In other words, when we went to the polls November the 8th, 2016, and voted in Donald Trump, they could not get in their mind how much the ruling class of this country is despised by the voters. And therefore, the assumption they made is something is wrong with the voters because they made the wrong decision in choosing Donald Trump. So their whole modus operandi is to take Donald Trump out of power because the people made the wrong verdict.
It's like the Gillett Otzman.
That's what this article is talking about.
Gillett Otzman's book, I gave you a copy of that, about being in time. He basically says the reason why, and he's reacting, he's in England, but he said the reason why the election of Donald Trump was possible is because the deep state, these professional politicians are so out of touch with the voters. They're so out of touch with their needs, their ideas, their concerns, their fears, and they instead of trying to put them to rest or to show that there's some possibility for resolution of these, they mock them. That's the arrogance of the elite. They don't try to address the people who they're supposed to represent. They mock you for bringing up points of consideration that you have. They mock you for that. Think that in mind. The people for the people, by the people, they're not. They're in it for themselves.
We have been captured by the elite, where we set up as a nation at the founding moments of this country through those great framers, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay. You have to look at, although he wasn't there at the Constitutional Convention, you have to look at Thomas Jefferson, whose writings in the Declaration of Independence was also a foundational part of this nation's establishment. You have to give Jefferson credit also, although he wasn't one of the framers of the Constitution. He was a framer of the ideals upon which the Constitution was in fact created. So I give him some credit for the founding of the nation's, Constitution as well. Although he's not really one of the ones that's involved in the writing and drafting of the Constitution, but you have to give him credit because of his role in the Declaration of Independence. So I give all those framers a lot of credit. They intended for this nation to have a government of limited powers, restrained by the Constitution, with the powers being delegated to the federal government by the states, and the states retaining all powers not therein delegated to the federal government, those powers being held and therefore in the body politic of the states and the people therein. The people being close to the state governments, therefore those powers held in the states, and because the people were close to the states, the powers retained also by the people in those states. That was the intention. And these people in the federal government, in what we call now the swamp, but this sewer in Washington, that claims we have government of the people, by the people, for the people, that probably went out the window whole cloth in 1913 when they passed, despite what was in the Constitution, the right to go in the pockets of the American people and pull and extract wealth out of their pockets and place it in the coffers of the federal government, which was never intended by the framers. And there's a question whether or not, even though it's added to the Constitution, there's a question here that has not been raised in the court, and that question is, can you amend the Constitution if the amendment of it will cancel out the strictures of what was intended by the framers? Can you amend it if by the amendment you in fact suspend the Constitution that was put in place by the framers? Is that constitutional? And
that amendment you're talking about, I don't think was fully ratified.
And that's another part of it, John. John, that's another part of it. Is that, you know what those guys did? They claim it was ratified. Those persons had left by the time, they waited till person left Washington. And then they claimed that we had enough states. See, the ratification process, the only one that we use in Article 5 is that it has to be proposed, the amendments have to be proposed by 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. That's the proposed amendment. And then, and look what happens next, to show you the states want to maintain control. Then the proposal has to be referred to the states for ratification, and it takes 3/4 of the states to ratify what the Congress has proposed. And until the 3/4 of the states ratify it, then it cannot become an amendment to the Constitution. They claim that they had 3/4 of the states, but that was done behind the backs of the states. They never ratified that amendment was never ratified. And John, you're right.
Talk about an end run.
It was an end run. They did an end run on the people. The states were supposed to ratify what Washington was in fact doing. In fact, what the states did, they had so many questions about the validity of the federal government, and they knew the government will seize more power than was in fact procured to it by the Constitution. They sent their representatives there to look over the shoulders of the federal government. First of all, they had the House, that was the people's body, and the people that were in the House were to come before the voters every 2 years and become validated again, because they wanted to restrain them. And if they had to go before the people on a regular basis every 2 years, then they would keep them under control and under wraps, because how much control can you gain in 2 years? And if you get out of control, you can answer to the voters in a 2-year period of time. Now the state representatives, they were given 6 years. because that's the states that were in fact setting up the federal government. So they gave them 6 years. And if anybody thinks the states were not the ones that was giving out this power, and they were not supposed to be the ones in charge, then ask yourself the question, why would it be that the House members would serve for 2 years before going before the voters, the president serves 4 years before going before the voters, but the senators, representatives of the states, they would serve 6 years. More than the members of the House and more than the president, the state representatives serves a 6-year term. And by the way, if you're going to change that by the 17th Amendment and have the popular election of the senators, which was not intended, in other words, they didn't want the states in control, and that's why they changed that in 1913. So they didn't just change the taxation policies; they changed how we elect senators also in that year. And the 17th Amendment gives a popular election of the senators. If that is true, what they should have also done is then change how many years those persons serve, because it's a contradiction to change how we elect senators and at the same time allow the 6-year term to stand. That's who they are. They maintain the 6-year term, but change the way we elect them, and we elect the senators today the same way we elect members of the House of Representatives. Never intended by the framers, but that's the kind of people we have now. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people is suspended in this country. And it was suspended when we began to grow the influence and power and the intrusion of the federal government in the lives of the American people. I was reading this book last night, which reminded me, I read a lot of Milton Friedman's work. And I was reading this book last night, again, probably for the third time, the book called Free to Be. And Milton Friedman said there are 4 basic reasons for government. You know, why we set government up. He said, try as he might, he could not find a way for the private sector to maintain national defense. You know, for a long time, he was trying to find some way to figure it out, because you don't want to have power given to these politicians of the government doing things that can be done better and done without taking people's liberty within the private sector. But there was no way to, in fact, do the national defense. You can imagine the chaos you would have if that was in the hands of the citizens. One part of the citizenry is singing it this way, another one singing it a different way. So the national defense is one thing that the government must, in fact, carry out. The federal government will carry out national defense. Defend the nation against the outside enemies. Protect the citizens also, number 2, from abuse of other citizens. Government acting there then as a referee. That's a legitimate role of government. The government also, he says, is another reason we have government, a legitimate reason why government can express itself in the domain of the body politic. Define the rules in the game that we play. We have to have somebody to tell us what the rules are. You know, in terms of the rules. I mean, in Florida, they have the sunshine rule. So that if you're building a house, everybody has the right to some sunshine in the state. So if you're building a house, you can't only build it so high because you're blocking the sunshine that somebody else should get. And they have a building code. Okay, government can help us to have a set of rules that sets up a degree of uniformity. That is, say the rules have to be the same rules for all the citizens to follow, so there's no big I's and little U's. Define the rules in which the game that we're in is played. That's a legitimate role of the government. And rule number 4, another reason why we have government, a legitimate reason we have government, is a mechanism. We must have a mechanism to adjudicate the meaning of the rules. We have to have some way of having an instrument, some mechanism that would that would adjudicate the rules, to tell us as a referee what these rules intend and what the rules mean. So we have the judiciary playing the role. We have two persons saying the rules differently. So we have to have some arbiter to tell us what the meaning of the rules are, and we would assume that what that would intend is they're looking at the language, and an arbiter, being a nonpartisan in the dispute, will say it means this and not the other thing in a nonpartisan way. Those are legitimate reasons why we have government. Beyond that, government is out of control. And that's what we have in Washington right now. Our government in Washington is out of control. And we have to understand it's out of control because it's doing that which goes beyond the parameters of what was intended by the framers. And I keep saying this over and over again. Unless we are talking about getting back to the framers, we're not having an honest discussion in America, because we have got to get the government back under the umbrella of the Constitution of the United States. Okay, that's my rant for this program. Hope you stay tuned to all the programs here at allpointstv.com and also 92.1. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.